So, again, just want to welcome Harris and say what a fabulous piece of work, unsurprisingly, again. Um, we will be taking questions from you guys in a little bit. So, do get ready. We get some interesting questions ready. The microphone will be traveling around finding you. But first of all, we'll have a bit of a chat. So, your third Poirot with Kenneth. How did you feel when you got a phone call saying, let's go and do another one?
Well, I kind of knew it was happening to an extent. There were talks between Ken and Mike Green, the screenwriter, for a few years that they had been working on this and adapting it. It was really just a matter of when. So, yes, I jumped at it, obviously.
Because I mean, the original is not set in Venice. That was something that they changed, and that obviously opens up a huge number of interesting visual things. I mean, seeing it the second time tonight, I think the other really outstanding thing in this film is the set is just incredible. The detail and the textures. I mean, that must have been great fun to be pointing a camera at. But also, I'm interested to know a bit about your involvement with the designer in what decisions were made in terms of that set, which is just so detailed and very, very interesting to look at.
Well, JP Kelly was the designer. This was my third film with JP. Jim Clay, who usually works with Ken, was busy on another film, but I made 2 films with Roger Michel with JP. He's a fantastic designer. We met up early on. We've already made 3 films together. Ken loves building a set, and we went through a process that was very similar to the other 2 films in that these were composite sets. So the same way we built a full-scale inside-out Karnak for Death on the Nile, that we even thought of floating at some point, and we never did. But it was built so that it could and go on a barge. We went back to figuring out what we could shoot in real Venice, what kind of an interior of a palazzo we could shoot, how we could connect the waterworks and the canals and all the work we had to do in the water, and then even the acute angles of some of the real palazzo, which were impossible due to the limitations of Venice. We decided on building a miniature for a part of it. So one of the goals, I think, Jake, that we really tried to do that comes out in the production design and the set dressing as well, because that's another kind of, although linked, but its own kind of department, was an absolute kind of desire to try our best to do as much in camera.
Well, if on that subject, because the other part of the set dressing is the practical lighting that's throughout the thing. I know we spoke about this the other day, but I think it was quite interesting what you were saying about the types of light that you tried to combine, and maybe you want to talk a bit about your thinking with the time frame and how that all worked.
Well, having composite sets like this, they have their own kind of lighting limitations. You don't have a grid. You don't have kind of you have to work very much, I think, with maybe some exterior lights that you use outside the windows, but everything interior is what you see, really. So we went about trying to research with JP what the time period would have had lighting-wise. I was leaning more towards gaslight, and there was proof that some houses, especially kind of if you didn't have the money to switch over to electricity, could have existed completely in gaslight. And then we settled on this kind of hybrid with Ken that was a little bit of gaslight still there, some candlelight, and obviously, because it was an opera singer, we thought that we could introduce theatrical lights. And one of the key lights that we thought might be interesting is what's known as a ghost light. A ghost light is something that you put on a stage at night in a theater, and you turn it off on when everyone's left the building. And we thought it was aptly named, but it also looks really nice as well. But it's there for a safety reason, so that a theatre is lit at night and no one falls off. But to this day, if you went round the West End at night, there'd be a theatre light in the middle of the stage. So some of it was just research, but these are all great tungsten features, and they have a really beautiful light. And then from that, you've got a few things to, there's some real candlelight in this and some real gas effects, and you can tell there's a kind of staccato effect on the face. So it was about balancing how much, I think, for me, had that tension that you get with flickering candles and gaslight, how much was kind of a little bit glamorous, and also how much of it was just plain. I think I tried often to make it ugly, because period films often just look too beautiful, and this is a really ugly part of kind of human nature here and the human condition. And I think you could get really obsessed with how beautiful you can make something, and I started getting obsessed with how ugly I could make it.
We had some pretty funky wide angles in there. There was one particular lens I think you were leaning on a bit there, which I liked.
Yes, probably the widest angles were the two spherical lenses, because it wasn't spherical, but the 13 and the 24 played a lot.
It's kind of hammer style Dutch angles. Did you have any particular specific film references for this project?
It's an odd story, because I couldn't find anything that specifically kind of felt that it touched everything. Although I would say Freddie Francis's The Innocents, at least it's in one house, it's a ghost story, etc. Kwaidan was interesting kind of from the subject matter, but I would say from a feel, for example, I would say In Cold Blood, Richard Brooks' film shot by Conrad Hall, again, a very, very horrific crime, and it is a masterpiece of masterpieces. It has the right amount of ugly for the human condition part of it, the right amount of I don't know, just also kind of playfulness as well. It was in my mind, it's one of the greatest films in terms of collaborations. Henry Bumstead, who was our teacher at AFI when we were both students, was a production designer. Quincy Jones did the score. The editing is superb. I forget Richard. I forget the name of the editor, but I would say that is a masterpiece of collaboration. And I'll give you an example. And we looked for little things like that. There's a scene in Cold Blood where they're driving through the desert, and they're hitchhiking in the desert, and a car passes by, and they're picking up empty Coke bottles because they've got no money and they want to get the refunds. The score Connie does the kind of lighting where he gets glints of light off the Coke bottles in the desert. Quincy Jones does the score by kind of doing it on glass, so you hear the melody on glass. I mean, that is production design, lighting, and music, and story, just so superbly kind of and simply done. So there were elements like that from In Cold Blood that have been inspirational always to me, but I've found particular inspiration on this.
Well, look, also here that after the opening, and with a few big exceptions, there's quite a small amount of camera movement. The camera is quite static, which I thought was an interesting decision. I mean, what kind of drove that?
That had a lot to do with Ken and discussions we had. We were very still on Belfast. We gained a certain amount of confidence in economy of lighting and movement in Belfast, and we wanted to bring some of that to this film. And it also was a way of conditioning ourselves to certain limitations which we had in terms of schedule, money. We had kind of a good 2 or 3 weeks less than Death on the Nile, which had a good 2 or 3 weeks less than Orient Express. There was a huge budget cut on this as well. So by you could either kind of feel bad about all the limitations, or you could embrace them, and they become your style. So we made a few decisions. One was that we wouldn't move the camera unless it was the odd bit of handheld, and then we wouldn't move the camera unless it was attached to a gondola or a human being, and that's where another film comes into play that I really love, which is a James Wong Howe film called Seconds. It's a Frankenheimer film. And the opening sequence, which is the title sequence, was designed by Salt and shot by Sol Bass. And that comes into play. We did a tribute to that.
Well, I noticed it today, the shot, which is kind of rotating with Ken in the foreground, and it's kind of spinning round attached to him. But there are a couple of camera mounts.
They're all in camera, kind of little just ways of messing with kind of someone's perception of what reality is. And again, it was, there's actually some really beautiful VFX that Artemis did on this, but she approached it the same way we did. She did as much kind of, I think, however complicated and beautiful it is, she just married everything together, and you can't tell what's in camera and what's not, I think, in this film. But yes, so I mean, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about cameras, but we did find smaller cameras.
No, they'll ask about that. We'll do that.
We did use smaller cameras for the body mounts. We used a Sigma FPL and some Leica glass, and we did Malcolm Hughes, my incredible grip, found ways of mounting them onto the actors, and then he also devised, the movement had to be circular. I kind of felt that you had to have this almost like you're underwater and you're being attacked by a swirl of barracuda, and so we devised with Malcolm all these ways of either a kind of spinning cameras around people, and most of it was really, really low tech. It was sliders but just very good use of 2 or 3 sometimes sliders together, and yes, not a single bit of dolly track was ever laid or used. And then I think we for safety reasons, and we decided against ladder pods, but again, we used a Long John Silver, a lighting stand, and a remote head for all those high angles. They just seemed like a way of not bringing a crane, not bringing in all the kind of, how could you have as light a footprint as possible, and get all these angles? And Italy, and in particular, well, not Italy, but Venice it's handheld and sticks type of a location. And if you want to get up high, it's all of us with a backpack.
Probably the city of Westminster is the only harder place to film in the world.
Probably. I would say Venice beats Westminster.
They've got some stunning new rules that you will enjoy. Just coming back to the camera event. I mean, one thing that I thought, again, really noticed it tonight. I mean, I've always seen it in your work. Is, I think that you are one of cinema's great portrait photographers, and obviously, in a film like this, which is a lot of people talking in an ensemble cast, there's really a lot of time on the screen where you can enjoy the lighting of the face. I wonder if you wanted to talk just a little bit about that.
Well, I think you've got to be really subtle, and you've got to never be the same. And again, it's how do you introduce a certain amount of ugliness of character without making it's this delicate one, not being flattering at the same time. And that's a hard one. And I think it's micro adjustments. I mean, kind of I felt the same way when I was doing Locke. It was just one great big moving portrait shoot. But and in that, it was very similar in that you just had to move things a little bit, and you got such a big difference. And if you only have close-ups like a film like this, and portrait shots really, and I would even consider the house as a character and required its level of portraiture, and that's how I felt about the Palazzo in Venice. I think you just find what's kind of the sight unseen, the bit inside, and that's what you're trying to get out. And that has more to do with what you feel about the scene. And if you keep things simple, I think you can make those adjustments really, really quickly. You know, like really, really quickly. Like that difference of a centimeter up or down of a Chinese lantern or a practical can make all the difference. The kind of idea that there's so much is the flicker too much? Is it not enough? Should it be on the face or should it be behind? That was kind of my constant reading of a scene and of, you know, not just what they were saying, but what they were feeling. So I go by feel, I think.
And on these projects, particularly where you've got Ken's, you know, got a major role in the film as well as directing it. I mean, it must be, I mean, an interesting part of the relationship that's developed over time. And I'm interested to know a little bit about, you know, is he super involved in every visual decision, or has he backed off and let you get on with it ever?
No, I mean, he certainly, I think, he's also the producer as well, on top of everything else. So what comes with that is, you know, from seeing Ken as my friend, I see a person with a huge responsibility that I want to kind of help get everything done to a point where he can let go and perform. Because ultimately, all those things, the thing that most people see on the screen is his acting. And he is very involved, but at the same time, I think we were together where someone we didn't like said something about someone we love very much. We went to Camera Mars, Jake, and a particular director, who shall remain nameless, said something about Dante Spinotti, who I think is one of the greatest cinematographers of all time. And he said, making a film with Dante is like doing maths with a calculator. And it really struck me that that's a bit of a definition of a cinematographer's role. That if you've done that, you've made it, you've taken the filmmaking aspects of it, you've broken them down into tangible bits, you know, that you are a real participant in that everything glides effortlessly. So I feel you can be that calculator in a way by doing a lot of prep, listening rather than talking. You know, especially with Ken, he's got lots of ideas. So make sure you listen, and then talk to your crew and your collaborators, and try to put all of that together.
Because I mean, how does it work? I mean, in terms of him deciding how to judge his performance, is he watching all the playback, or?
He does watch playback afterwards. He always has someone watch his performance. It's been various people throughout.
So he has a kind of
definitely. The one thing I have to do is just, he hates blinking in camera, so I'm usually shouting eyes, which means he's blinked and he'll do it again. That's the one kind of little thing I do with him, and how he looks, and he also knows very much like how he will come out. And it's not about vanity, it's about how he kind of, like, should I be formidable here? Should I be kind of scared here? And how does camera and lighting affect his performance that way? He also has to do all of this while looking at an ensemble cast and have a monologue.
I mean, it's a pretty amazing achievement as a director, I have to say.
Yes, and do a 10-page monologue. You know, I spoke to J.P. Kelly the other day, and he said, I'll miss this film so much, because every time I'll go back to another film, and you know that you need a miniature because that's the only way you could get those angles. If it wasn't for someone like Ken, I wouldn't get them. So he understands that process, and as a director and a producer, he'll really put his foot down and say, we must have this, and it's going to have value on screen. And I think one of the great things that he does is he can understand that particular aspect of filmmaking and know when to throw the importance and and put his back on the line for things like that, because if they fail quite badly and in a costly way.
So what about, in terms of the various challenges this project had, what was the hardest one really for you to get your head around?
I think the seance was a pretty big deal for us, because they all often seem the same. They're often quite complicated, and we wanted to simplify. I think we had 2 days for this scene, and it was a big scene to pull off. And this whole kind of circling predatory thing, we started talking about it, but we didn't know how you eventually put that into, there was the idea of, like, I started kind of saying, well, why don't we circle do the opposite of what we did in the circular shot in Belfast, and instead of going round the boy that we did, which we did on Belfast, why don't we put the camera in the middle and rotate round and try and reverse that whole, what sets off, a cinematic event that's a human condition event that starts off the narrative in a certain way. And then Ken had the idea of actually, which we'd never actually seen in a film or any theatre production that we knew about seances. He had the idea of putting Michelle Yeoh's character in the middle and setting that crucifix table around with everyone else. And that immediately opened up the opportunity to do kind of all this circular rotation in the camera movement. But he thought long and hard about that. Like, the idea was there of what kind of movement, but you can't just throw it onto an actor or the wrong blocking. So he did due diligence in his blocking and his homework, and he would go around and set tables up in the room, and we'd get our ADs to play all the parts and try different things out until we found something that seemed to work. And even down to the last minute, and we rehearsed and planned and thought about that. I would say we were down to the kind of perfecting and going further and making teeny adjustments and changes up until when we were about to shoot it. And we spent an enormous amount of time on that scene.
I also really like the sort of shadow play thing in the children's party. How did that get put together?
There was a marionette sequence in, and I'm Greek and I like shadow puppets. That's our version of puppeteering, and I grew up with it. And I suggested it to Ken and showed him some images, took him some books of Greek shadow puppets and some of Vietnamese and Indonesian shadow puppets, and he really liked the idea. It just felt spookier and scarier. And so he contacted some various kind of puppeteering companies, and they started doing demos for him. It also meant that we could shoot what we couldn't do with marionettes or kind of more Italian puppeteering is you'd have to do that live in front of the children, etc. Whereas what I think the other thing he just clicked onto that straight away. I mean, like, it was almost an immediate decision. That's how we're doing it. Is he realized we could actually rehearse it, film it, and then do an actual film projection of the shadow puppeteering in the set with which just you've got 30 children.
You're actually kind of playing it back.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
But that's the kind of things that he'll just latch onto and immediately not just see the visual benefit of it, that it's a stark black and white, but that there's a production value to that and a efficiency to that.
All right. Well, I think it's time to take some questions. So if microphone, we've got one in the front here, but can you just wait until the microphone gets to you, please?
Thank you. Congratulations. You had Visconti's Death in Venice, you had Nick Rogue's Don't Look Now, but with this cinematography, you surpassed them. You evoked that Venice I remembered very much. Of course, it helped that it rained quite a lot when I was there, but nevertheless, the sheer atmosphere, the spookiness of the place, it made my scalp tingle. The way you captured this. You used the Venice 2 camera and various Panavision lenses to capture as much as you could of this fabulous atmosphere that's there. What's your favorite lens, shall we say, to capture the magic?
That you used on this film, you mean?
Yes,
Right.
of course, here, yes.
It's also become my favorite lens of all. The kind of auto and ultra Panatars that we use
Right,
on this,
Panatars.
I think are absolutely incredible. And they both are.
Yes.
I like both sets. But I think, although we use some wider ones, and I've since used a kind of 27, that 35 to 40 is something pretty magic. And I think they're the crown jewels of Panavision. I think they are unsurpassed. And I think they're really brilliant now with digital cinematography and this kind of medium format.
A
For
marriage
us,
made in heaven.
they are, and they were sleeping. They were dormant for so many years because they were used only for kind of very, very specific 65mm presentations.
Right.
And it's particularly now that we have a VistaVision size sensor where that 1.25 anamorphic squeeze on them gives you a just above 1.85 aspect ratio. So it's about 1.9 aspect ratio, and you get pretty much the full 8K resolution. So it just, I think the Venice 2 and the Panatars is for me, kind of wanting to do something in 1.85 in particular and not in 2.40 in that widescreen aspect. I think it's a magic formula.
And now it goes in IMAX. That's the beauty.
Yes, I mean, there are, IMAX is closer to 1.85 for sure.
Right.
For sure.
Anyway, I better not hog it.
Okay. Let's have another question. There's one about 7 rows back on the right. And one right at the back.
Yeah. Congratulations on a fantastic look. Again, going back to 65mm and the two previous, Agatha Christie's, I just wonder if you could tell us the background to shooting on 65 on the two previous and the move to the, the VistaVision, style Cine Alta Venice here. What were the thought processes? Why the switch? Did budget come into it? I'd just be interested in that.
Good question. There were a few factors to that, and I think partly, I think there are many photographic aspects that you wish to carry through from one film to the other if you're making kind of a few of them. And for me, there were photographic aspects from the previous two films that were more important in this case than the celluloid to digital. And one of those things was depth of field. It was crucial that this film was shot in at extreme low light levels, in candlelight and gaslight, etc. But traditionally, and I've loved all those films, they're shot with the aid of whether they're digital or film, because really we've only had 800 in digital, and then previous Sonys were about 2,000 plus. But we've relied on lenses to help us with that. Barry Lyndon being the kind of the first and foremost in that, and that brings with it a certain depth of field,
or lack of,
or lack of, and for me, part of following through with the tradition of portraiture that I'd done on the previous two films was to shoot at least at a T4. And with the Sony Venice 2 and the Panatars, I could basically get the highest resolution image at a T4 and still use candlelight and gaslight, and not have to worry about kind of how much the head spins and are both eyes in focus or not. So those kind of photographic qualities, an array of them in a way, and the sum of them was the most important thing. I do miss shooting on 65. I think I would have not done the film a service by kind of insisting on staying on 65, both for the how do you get around Venice, for the kind of that particular look with that kind of lighting, with a shallow depth of field, I don't think would have done justice to the story and the portraiture. So I kind of put all of this in a list and talked to Ken about it, and we both agreed that this was the best way to go for this particular picture.
That's great. That really explains it well. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think Nick's got a question down here.
Hi there. Great work. Thank you very much. Bit techie this, but this is probably the only cinema in the UK that we could watch a film that you've finished in HDR. And it really did look incredible, the darkness. I loved that stuff. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you approached particularly the filming decisions you made, and also, of course, the grading, how you did the color grading? Did you work in HDR first? Because most of the rest of the world is going to see this in standard definition or standard dynamic range. Would you just talk us through some of that, please? Thank you.
Good question, Nick. A couple of things. First of all, I have a team around me that starts from kind of my camera assistants, DITs, like even someone I work or on a lot like Callum Just and Joe, our Daly's colorist, all the way to Goldcrest in terms of inception, capture to the end, that we all work together. Now that's number one, the most important thing. So we all work together to figure out a LUT and a kind of the light levels that we'll be working at, so that there's nothing really that's kind of to chance from the beginning to the end. And we do a lot of testing for how we'd like a kind of the grade to look even before we start shooting, Nick. That's one thing. But the other thing I think that really I find helps is I've always believed, even when I shot on film, that I'd want to do a DI in the end, and that there would be it's a real controlled process to make everything look as similar as possible, so that you don't try something in HDR that you wouldn't be able to achieve in standard definition. You don't, if you want to kind of have a consistency, and this goes even to prints. When I was making prints and 65mm prints or 70mm prints for the previous two, that there was a certain involvement and a certain amount of calibration and a certain way of working within the limitations. One of the things about kind of working in HDR that I do with Rob Pitsey and Goldcrest and Laurent is that we never go too extreme with the HDR. So the highlights are never that particularly bright. The darkness part is always kind of, I think, is pretty much the same. You get a little bit more detail in Dolby Vision, but we don't push the highlights to the same extreme that you possibly could. So it's almost automated now. I think Laurent now has a particular Dolby LUT for us and an algorithm that just makes it very easy to translate. And I did the least amount of post on this because I was on another film, but Rob Pitsey and Goldcrest did a great job kind of keeping on top of everything, and I did my best to go in and have a look as much as I could. But I think we've all worked together for so long that we kind of know that we won't push something to an extreme that just wouldn't work in all of your kind of deliverables. And for me, I think it should be an equal kind of experience watching this at home. And write down, you know, a film will automatically switch to Dolby Vision if your monitor at home has Dolby Vision. And I would say the dynamic range on most consumer televisions is pretty incredible. I mean, the most calibrated monitor you could use to judge grading if you can't go to a calibrated screen is an iPad Pro. They're absolutely perfectly calibrated. So I think I think there are ways, but I think you have to be careful of how you push the more advanced systems of presentation and not push them too far.
Harris, could I ask, did you have any HDR monitoring on set?
Yes. Well, I had one.
Right.
And I'd run to it when I needed to. But even if you, and Callum and Joe and Dino are all here to maybe talk a bit more about it, but you couldn't always plug that. Like that takes away from the ease of use of QTake, etc. So there are some limitations.
Right. Best to just use your knowledge and go.
I use the light meter, and one of the things I love about the Sony Venice 2 is it was bang on by light meter. I sometimes went back. I had to go back to the kind of monitor more for Ken than for me.
Right. Anybody else?
This is less of a lens question. It's more of a shot list question. And it's like, obviously with the time constraint that you guys had, whether you had like obviously like a, you know, a set shot list, did you have time to sort of improvise a bit? And, you know, if a shot sort of didn't work out like you wanted it to, would you sort of change it slightly a bit or change a completely different angle? Like how was your freedom regarding that?
Well, I wouldn't exactly call it a freedom. It's just what you see is what we shot pretty much. Everything's in there. It was a pretty tight schedule. So there are a few scenes, well, I don't know if there's scenes, but there's little bits missing. But pretty much what you see is the shot, is the scene assembly. In terms of shot listing, we don't really shot list with Ken. I set up a stage in a way that I know exactly kind of my options lighting-wise, and I'm very, very quick with the lighting. Ken does something which is extremely useful. He gives up his Saturday, and he goes in with the ADs every Saturday on every film, and he rehearses with the ADs and a phone, and he does his bit of blocking and takes some videos that he sends to us Saturday night. So I've got an idea of what he's thinking blocking-wise, and usually his Saturday's work is the entire week. And then he'll then pick up with the next week, the next Saturday. We short list things that we think are important or difficult or will give us a, you know, that we like, for example, at the end of the film, we said, if we're going to be so static and so kind of rigid and everything, the camera's got to just not be a barracuda and fly off like a bird at the end, and just, it's like it's just set free. So that's the kind of language we use. In terms of having time to do it again if we didn't like it, no. There's no such luxury at all.
Thank you.
Anybody else? You're getting off lightly here.
Hi, Harris. Thank you. That was beautiful. Up here. I also just have a question kind of about prep and what it was like prepping for a film with such an ensemble cast. And did you storyboard a lot? What was it like in the pre-production process? No
storyboarding, but a lot of testing, and we did about 14 days of testing to the point where we ended up using some of the tests. So I think most of the shadow puppet, we ended up just using what we did in the test. It was good enough. Even the kind of bendy mirror shots where he's really hallucinating, that's with just a black drape behind, and it was the test. And Ken liked it so much, he said, "I'm not going to do it on set. I know you'd get a bit of color in the back, but it is that was, again, we were such a short schedule. It was good enough." But yes, my prep is mainly in kind of the lighting and all the other preparation, the camera, what kind of cameras, what kind of lenses, at what f-stop should we be working at, what those kinds of questions, what kind of grip gear we would use, and I just put everything together, have an idea of what kind of shots we'll do, and then I leave the rest to the morning's blocking and the notes I get on the Saturday.
Harris, it looked absolutely seamless. All the differences from models and location sets.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
Great job, Harris. You said how you would get the notes on the Saturday. I just wanted to know, it's more of a personal thing. How would you fit your family and work the whole job, knowing that you're doing pretty much 7 days or 6 days constantly throughout a whole project?
Well, I didn't do the 6 days.
More like more mentally, like you're not switched off because you're waiting for something.
I find it really easy to switch off. I'm out the door and gone.
He's very calm. I can vouch for that.
I go surfing in my head within seconds. I can fall asleep within 2 seconds as well. It's a lot of olive oil in my diet, probably, or something like that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, listen, it was great to chat, and congratulations again. I've worked with only a few DPs in my life because I occasionally moonlight as a director, but I have to say, working with Harris was really one of the highlights. And what was particularly interesting about the experience is that he just approached everything ridiculously calmly. I mean, it was a real lesson for me. Because even if that wasn't how he's feeling inside, and I can't imagine that working on films like this, you can't have moments where you're like, fucking hell, I don't know what's going to get done. But I'm sure you don't show it, because you do have a remarkably calm demeanour, which is very nice to have around. And I think it's one of the contributing factors, apart from your enormous talent, in your success as a cinematographer. Anyway, I'd like to just say thank you, and thank you very much for coming, and Harry Zambarloukos.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for doing it.